She pressed her hands against his chest, feeling his heart stutter beneath her palms, and whispered the prayer she'd learned from her grandmother. Every life is sacred. 3 minutes later, she was unemployed, and 3 days later, everything changed. Hey there, my beautiful family and friends. Welcome back. If you're ready to settle in for another unforgettable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hearing from you, no matter where you are in the world, always makes my day. And hey, if you enjoy this one, stay tuned, because there are always more powerful stories on the way, and you definitely don't want to miss them. Before we begin, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone you love. You never know whose heart this story might touch. Now, let me take a moment to speak into your life. I pray that whatever burden you're carrying, you find peace that passes all understanding. I pray that in the quiet moments when no one sees your tears, God sees you and comforts you. I pray for healing over every broken piece of your heart, and strength to rise again no matter how many times life has knocked you down. May joy find its way back to you, even if you've forgotten what it feels like. May your faith be reignited, your spirit lifted, and may love, real, deep, unconditional love, surround you wherever you are right now. You're not forgotten, you're not invisible, and you're not alone. This community is your safe space, and this story, like all the others, is here to remind you just how powerful your journey truly is. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. The pre-dawn darkness at Camp Pendleton carried the sharp bite of California winter, and Nurse Elena Rodriguez pulled her thin cardigan tighter as she hurried across the training grounds. Her worn sneakers, the only pair she owned, squeaked against the wet asphalt, a sound that made her wince. Everything about her seemed to apologize for existing. The way she kept her head down, the way she clutched her second-hand medical bag, the way she'd learned to make herself small in a world that already saw her as insignificant. At 28, Elena had mastered the art of invisibility. Poor Latina, and working 3 jobs to keep her head above water, she'd grown accustomed to being overlooked. The other medical staff at the base barely acknowledged her. She was just the contract nurse who covered the graveyard shifts nobody else wanted. But Elena didn't mind the darkness. In the quiet hours before dawn, she could focus on what mattered, healing. Her phone buzzed with another overdue notice. Rent. Again. She silenced it without reading the full message. There would be time to worry about money later. There was always time to worry about money. Right now, she had a job to do. The medical station was a converted trailer that smelled of antiseptic and instant coffee. Elena flicked on the fluorescent lights and began her routine. Checking supplies, reviewing the night's training schedule, preparing for whatever injuries the day might bring. Boot camp was brutal by design, and she'd seen everything from heat exhaustion to broken bones. The recruits were pushed to their limits, and sometimes beyond. She was organizing bandages when she heard it, a commotion outside, voices raised in alarm. Medic. We need a medic. Elena grabbed her bag and ran. 15 miles away, in a luxury apartment overlooking the San Diego harbor, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his uniform with military precision. Every crease was perfect, every button aligned. At 32, he was a decorated Navy SEAL with 3 tours under his belt and a reputation for being harder than coffin nails. His reflection showed a man carved from granite, square jaw, steel gray eyes, and scars that told stories he'd never share. But the mirror couldn't show the poison that had been festering in his heart for years. Jake had learned to hate early and efficiently. It started with his father's drunken rants about those people taking jobs from real Americans. It crystallized during his first deployment when his best friend died in an IED explosion, and Jake needed someone to blame beyond the obvious enemy. It hardened into something ugly and permanent when he came home to find his ex-wife had left him for her co-worker, a man whose skin was darker than Jake's and whose success felt like a personal insult. The hate had become his armor, protecting him from the vulnerability of caring about anyone who might disappoint him. It was easier to despise than to trust, simpler to judge than to understand. And in the military, where brotherhood was supposed to transcend everything, Jake had found plenty of others who shared his views, even if they were quieter about it. Today, he was returning to Camp Pendleton as a guest instructor, a chance to shape the next generation of warriors. He told himself he was there to make them stronger, but the truth was darker. He was there to make them more like him. Jake's phone rang. His commanding officer. Morrison, change of plans. We're starting with night maneuvers. The recruits need to see what real combat looks like in the dark. Copy that, sir. I'll be there in 20. He grabbed his keys, not knowing that in less than 4 hours, his carefully constructed world would shatter in the hands of a woman he'd been taught to despise. The training exercise was supposed to be routine, a midnight simulation designed to test the recruit's ability to navigate hostile terrain in darkness. Jake had run similar drills dozens of times, his body moving with the fluid precision of a man who'd turned warfare into an art form. But routine had a way of becoming deadly without warning. Elena was restocking her medical supplies when the first shouts echoed across the training ground. Then came the sound that made her blood freeze, the sharp crack of something structural giving way, followed by a scream that cut through the night like a blade. She was running before her conscious mind caught up, her bag bouncing against her hip as she sprinted toward the obstacle course. In the distance, she could see flashlights converging on a collapsed section of the rope bridge, a training apparatus that had claimed another victim. "What happened?" she called out as she reached the cluster of recruits. "The bridge gave way," a young Marine gasped. Staff Sergeant Morrison fell about 15 feet. "He's not moving." Elena pushed through the crowd, her training taking over. She'd seen enough trauma to know that the first few minutes were critical. The difference between life and death often came down to who was willing to act when everyone else was frozen by fear. Jake Morrison lay crumpled at the base of the obstacle, his perfect uniform now torn and dirty. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow, irregular. Elena dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving to check his pulse. That's when she saw the tattoo on his forearm, a symbol she recognized with a sick feeling in her stomach. It was subtle, designed to look like military insignia to the casual observer, but Elena had grown up in neighborhoods where such symbols carried weight. She knew what it meant. For a moment, her hands hesitated. This man, this decorated soldier, wore his hatred on his skin like a badge of honor. How many people like her had he looked down on? How many times had he used his position to make others feel small and unwanted? But then his breathing hitched, and Elena heard her grandmother's voice echoing across the years. "Mija, when someone is drowning, you don't ask if they deserve to be saved. You throw them the rope. What would you do if you had to save someone who hated everything about who you are? Drop a comment and let me know, because Elena's about to make a choice that will change everything." Elena's hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory from countless hours of training taking over where her heart wavered. Jake's pulse was weak and thready beneath her fingertips, his skin growing pale in the harsh glare of the emergency floodlights that had been hastily erected around the scene. His airways compromised, she announced to the circle of recruits who stood frozen in shock. "Someone call for an ambulance, now." She tilted Jake's head back, checking for obstructions. His breathing had stopped entirely. In the sudden silence, she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could smell the metallic scent of blood mixed with the damp earth beneath them. This was the moment. The choice. Elena looked down at the man who wore his hatred like armor, whose tattoo seemed to burn against his skin in the artificial light. She thought of every sideways glance she'd endured, every time someone had made her feel less than human because of the color of her skin or the accent that crept into her voice when she was tired. She thought of her grandmother, who had cleaned houses for families who wouldn't let her use the front door. And then she thought of the Hippocratic oath she'd taken as a nurse, the promise that transcended everything else. "First, do no harm." "Step back," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "Give me room to work." Elena positioned her hands on Jake's chest, lacing her fingers together the way she'd been taught. The first compression sent a shock through her arms. This was a human being, not a symbol of everything wrong with the world. This was someone's son, someone's brother, someone who had people who would mourn him if she failed. 1, 2, 3. She counted aloud, pushing hard and fast, feeling his ribs flex beneath her palms. After 30 compressions, she tilted his head back and sealed her mouth over his, breathing life into lungs that had forgotten how to work. The taste was metallic, tinged with blood, but Elena didn't hesitate. She gave him 2 rescue breaths and returned to compressions, her world narrowing to the rhythm of CPR. 30 and 2, 30 and 2, the dance between death and life that she'd performed too many times to count. "Come on," she whispered between breaths. "Come on, don't you dare give up." Around her, she was dimly aware of voices, someone shouting orders, the distant wail of sirens, the shuffle of boots on gravel. But her focus remained laser-sharp on the man beneath her hands, on the stubborn heart that refused to beat on its own. On the fourth cycle, Jake's body convulsed. He coughed, blood speckling his lips, and his eyes fluttered open, gray as storm clouds and filled with confusion. For a moment he stared up at Elena, his gaze unfocused but alive, so beautifully alive. "You're okay," she breathed, relief flooding through her like warm honey. "You're going to be okay." Jake's lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Elena leaned closer, her ear near his mouth. What are you?" he whispered, his voice raw and broken. The question hit her like a physical blow. Not who are you or what happened, but what are you? As if she were something other than human, something that needed to be categorized and dismissed. Elena pulled back, her hands still pressed against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of the heart she'd just restarted. In his eyes, she saw the exact moment recognition dawned, when he realized that his life had been saved by someone he'd been taught to see as less than himself. The disgust that flickered across his features was subtle but unmistakable. "The paramedics are here," someone called out, and Elena was gently but firmly moved aside as the EMTs took over. She watched them load Jake onto a stretcher, watched him disappear into the ambulance, and felt something cold settle in her chest. She had saved his life, and he looked at her like she was contaminated. "Rodriguez." The voice cut through the pre-dawn quiet like a blade. Elena turned to see Colonel Harrison approaching, his face grim in the fading darkness. Behind him walked Dr. Patricia Vance, the head of medical services, a woman who had never bothered to learn Elena's first name despite working together for 8 months. "Sir." Elena's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she packed her medical supplies. "We need to talk. My office. Now." The walk across the base felt like a death march. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, but deep down, she already knew. She'd seen the way some of the other staff had looked at her after the incident, not with gratitude or respect, but with something darker. Suspicion. Resentment. Colonel Harrison's office was spartanly decorated, an American flag, a few commendations, a photo of him with various military dignitaries. He didn't invite Elena to sit. "Staff Sergeant Morrison is stable," he began without preamble. "The doctors say your quick action saved his life." Elena felt a flicker of hope. "I'm glad he's." "However," Harrison continued, his voice cutting through her relief like ice, "there have been concerns raised about your conduct during the incident." "Concerns?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Vance stepped forward, her expression cold and clinical. "Several witnesses reported that you seemed to hesitate before beginning treatment, that you appeared to be evaluating the patient rather than immediately providing care." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "That's not. I was assessing his condition. That's standard protocol." "Others have suggested," Harrison interrupted, "that your hesitation might have been motivated by personal factors. That perhaps your background influenced your initial response to treating a decorated military officer." The words hit Elena like physical blows. They were accusing her of letting her race, her background, her supposed prejudices interfere with her medical judgment. They were turning her moment of moral struggle, the very human pause before choosing to save someone who hated her, into evidence of professional misconduct. "I saved his life," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Whatever you think about my motivations, I saved his life. And we're grateful for that," Dr. Vance said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "However, the appearance of bias in medical treatment is something we cannot tolerate. The military requires absolute confidence in our medical personnel." Elena understood now. This wasn't about her performance. It was about perception. It was about the discomfort of watching someone like her save someone like Jake Morrison. It was about maintaining an order where heroes looked a certain way and victims deserved their salvation. "Your contract is terminated, effective immediately," Harrison said. "You'll be escorted off the base within the hour." The words echoed in the small office like gunshots. Elena stood there, feeling everything she'd worked for crumble around her feet. 3 jobs, and now she was down to 2. Rent money gone. Health insurance gone. The small sense of purpose she'd found in healing others, stripped away because she dared to save the wrong person. "Sir, please. The decision is final, Rodriguez. Security will escort you out." An hour later, Elena sat in her battered Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, staring at her phone. The termination paperwork lay crumpled on the passenger seat beside her medical bag. The tools of a trade she was no longer allowed to practice, at least not here. She thought about calling her sister, but what would she say? That she'd been fired for saving a man's life? That doing the right thing had cost her everything? That the system she'd tried so hard to serve had chewed her up and spit her out the moment she became inconvenient? Instead, she sat in the silence, watching the sun rise over a world that suddenly felt much colder and more hostile than it had 12 hours ago. Elena Rodriguez had saved a life that night. She'd chosen compassion over comfort, duty over disgust. She'd proven that love could triumph over hate, even if only for a moment. And for that act of grace, she'd lost everything. But sometimes, the universe has a way of keeping score. Sometimes, the seeds we plant in darkness bloom in ways we never expect. And sometimes, the people we save find ways to save us back. Elena just didn't know it yet. 3 days had passed since the accident, and Jake Morrison lay in his hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in the acoustic panels for the 100th time. His body was healing. The doctors had been clear about that. Mild concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a collection of bruises that painted his torso in shades of purple and yellow. He'd be back to full duty within a month. But his mind was a different battlefield entirely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The woman who had breathed life back into his lungs, whose hands had restarted his heart. Her dark eyes, filled with something he couldn't name. Not pity, not disgust, but something that made his chest tight in ways that had nothing to do with his injuries. The rational part of his brain, the part trained by years of military discipline, told him he should be grateful. She had saved his life, after all. Basic human decency demanded acknowledgement, if not thanks. But the other part, the part that had been carefully cultivated by his father's bitter words and reinforced by years of choosing hate over vulnerability, whispered different truths. She had hesitated. He'd seen it in her eyes, that moment of calculation before she'd acted. What if she'd decided differently? What if her kind of people couldn't be trusted with the lives of real Americans? Knock, knock. Jake turned to see Captain Rodriguez, no relation to the nurse, despite the shared surname, standing in the doorway with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "How you feeling, Morrison?" "Like I got hit by a truck, sir. But ready to get back to work." Captain Rodriguez pulled up a chair, his expression growing serious. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. There's been some developments regarding the incident." Jake's jaw tightened. "What kind of developments?" "The nurse who treated you, Elena Rodriguez. She's been terminated." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, though he couldn't understand why. Terminated? For what? Officially? Budget cuts and contract restructuring. Captain Rodriguez's tone suggested there was more to the story. Unofficially? There were concerns about her response time, questions about whether she provided the best possible care under the circumstances. Jake stared at his superior officer, processing the implications. "She saved my life." "Yes, she did. And that's been noted in her file. But there were other factors at play." The careful phrasing told Jake everything he needed to know. Elena Rodriguez had been fired not for failing to save him, but for being the wrong kind of person to save him. The system had protected its own by removing the inconvenient reminder that heroes didn't always look the way they were supposed to. Jake should have felt vindicated. This was how things were supposed to work, order maintained, hierarchies preserved, everyone in their proper place. Instead, he felt sick. Where is she now? The question escaped before he could stop it. Captain Rodriguez looked surprised. "I don't know." "Why?" Jake turned back to the ceiling tiles, resuming his count. "No reason. Just curious." But it wasn't curiosity that kept him awake that night, staring into the darkness and remembering the taste of life being breathed back into his lungs. Elena's apartment was a studio in the kind of building where the elevator worked half the time and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every crying baby, every late-night television program. She sat cross-legged on her second-hand futon, surrounded by bills and job applications, trying to make numbers add up that refused to cooperate. Without the base contract, she was down to her 2 remaining jobs, weekend shifts at a nursing home and overnight hours at a walk-in clinic in a rough part of town. Combined, they barely covered rent, let alone food, utilities, and the student loans that followed her like hungry ghosts. Her phone buzzed with another text from her sister Maria. "Just saw the news about the base. You okay? Need money. Elena stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Maria was a teacher with 3 kids and a husband who worked construction when he could find it. They had their own struggles, their own bills to pay. The last thing Elena wanted was to become another burden on her family. "I'm fine. Just a contract ending. Looking for something new." The lie came easily, but it tasted bitter. She wasn't fine. She was drowning, and the life preserver she'd been clinging to had just been yanked away because she'd dared to save the wrong person. Elena picked up the newspaper, an actual physical newspaper because internet was a luxury she couldn't afford, and scanned the help-wanted ads. Most required experience she didn't have or offered wages that wouldn't cover her rent. A few looked promising until she read the fine print. Background check required. References from previous employers. Must have clean employment record. How do you explain being fired for saving someone's life? How do you put a positive spin on being terminated because your compassion made other people uncomfortable? Her laptop, an ancient machine that wheezed and groaned with every startup, finally connected to the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi. Elena opened her email, hoping for responses to the applications she'd submitted over the past 3 days. Rejection. Rejection. Position has been filled. We've decided to go with another candidate. The last email made her pause. It was from St. Mary's Hospital, one of the larger medical centers in the city. She'd applied for a position in their emergency department. A long shot, given that they usually required more experience than she had. Asterisk, Dear Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your interest in the emergency department nurse position. While your qualifications are impressive, we have decided to pursue other candidates at this time. We will keep your resume on file for future opportunities. However, we wanted to reach out regarding a different matter. We understand you were recently involved in an incident at Camp Pendleton where you provided life-saving care to a patient. We would be interested in speaking with you about this experience, as it demonstrates the kind of quick thinking and dedication we value in our staff. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss potential opportunities. Sincerely, Dr. Sarah Chin, Director of Emergency Services, asterisk. Elena read the email 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs. Someone had heard about what happened at the base, but instead of seeing it as a liability, they saw it as an asset. Instead of questioning her judgment, they were impressed by her actions. For the first time in 3 days, she felt something that might have been hope. But even as she reached for her phone to call the number in the email signature, doubt crept in. What if this was another trap? What if they brought her in just to humiliate her further? What if the story had been twisted in the telling, and they expected someone different than who she actually was? Elena set the phone down and walked to her small bathroom, staring at herself in the cracked mirror. The woman looking back at her was tired, scared, and running out of options. But she was also the same woman who had knelt in the dirt 3 nights ago and breathed life into the lungs of someone who hated her. She was the woman who had chosen love over fear, duty over disgust, healing over hate. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Elena picked up her phone and dialed. Meanwhile, across town in his sterile hospital room, Jake Morrison was having his own crisis of faith. The television droned in the background, some mindless daytime talk show. But his attention was focused on the small notebook in his lap, where he'd been trying to write a letter for the past 2 hours. Dear Nurse Rodriguez, he'd started, then crossed it out. To the woman who saved my life, he'd tried next, but that felt too dramatic. Elena, he'd written finally, but even her first name felt too intimate, too presumptuous. What do you say to someone who gave you back your life when you'd spent years believing they didn't deserve theirs? How do you apologize for a lifetime of hatred without sounding like you're only sorry because you got caught? How do you thank someone for seeing your humanity when you'd refused to see theirs? Jake crumpled up another failed attempt and threw it toward the wastebasket. It missed, joining the growing pile of discarded drafts on the floor. The truth was, he didn't know how to feel about what had happened. Part of him, the part that had been carefully trained by years of prejudice, insisted that her hesitation proved his point. She had judged him, just as he had judged her. The only difference was that she'd overcome her bias while he'd nursed his like a pet snake. But another part of him, a part that had been buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed, whispered different truths. She had saved him not because of who he was, but despite who he was. She had looked at his tattoo, recognized what it meant, and chosen to see past it to the human being underneath. When was the last time someone had shown him that kind of grace? When was the last time he deserved it? Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and doing what's easy? Elena and Jake are both struggling with the aftermath of that choice. What do you think Jake should do next? Let me know in the comments. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Jake looked up to see a young Marine in dress uniform. Private Collins, one of the recruits who had witnessed the accident. Staff Sergeant Morrison? Sorry to bother you, sir. I just wanted to check on how you were doing. I'm fine, Collins. Shouldn't you be in training? The young man shifted uncomfortably. Yes, sir. I wanted to ask you something. About the nurse who helped you. Jake's grip tightened on his pen. What about her? Is it true she got fired? Some of the guys are saying she lost her job because of what happened that night. The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Jake could see the confusion in the young Marine's eyes, the same confusion he'd been wrestling with for 3 days. How do you reconcile a system that punishes people for doing the right thing? I don't know, Collins. Personnel matters aren't my concern. But even as he said the words, Jake knew they were a lie. It was his concern. Elena Rodriguez had lost her job because she'd saved his life, and he was the only one who could do anything about it. The question was whether he had the courage to try. When fate refuses to let go. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring Elena from the first decent sleep she'd had in a week. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness of her studio apartment, squinting at the unknown number. Elena Rodriguez? The voice was crisp, professional, tinged with urgency. Yes, this is Elena. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from St. Mary's Hospital. I know it's late, but we have an emergency situation and we need someone with your specific experience. Are you available to come in immediately? Elena sat up, instantly alert. After her phone interview with Dr. Chen 3 days ago, she'd been told they would be in touch about potential opportunities. She hadn't expected a middle-of-the-night call. What kind of emergency? Multi-vehicle accident on the interstate. We're expecting multiple trauma cases, and we're short-staffed. I remember you mentioning your experience with field medicine and emergency response. We need someone who can think on their feet. Elena was already reaching for her clothes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you. Report to the emergency department. Ask for me directly. The drive through the empty streets gave Elena time to think. This wasn't a job offer. It was a test. Dr. Chen was giving her a chance to prove herself under pressure, to show that the incident at Camp Pendleton was a demonstration of her skills, not a liability. St. Mary's Hospital at 3 a.m. was a different world from the daytime chaos Elena had glimpsed during her interview. The emergency department hummed with controlled urgency, nurses and doctors moving with the practiced efficiency of people who dealt with life and death on a regular basis. Elena Rodriguez? A petite Asian woman in scrubs approached, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I'm Dr. Chen. Thank you for coming in so quickly. Of course. What do you need me to do? Dr. Chen led her toward the trauma bays, speaking rapidly as they walked. The accident happened about an hour ago. Drunk driver hit a military transport vehicle head-on. We've got 3 civilians with various injuries, but the military personnel. She paused, glancing at Elena. One of them specifically requested you. Elena's steps faltered. Requested me? How would they even know? Elena Rodriguez? The voice stopped her cold. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, and found herself face to face with Jake Morrison. He was sitting on the edge of a hospital bed in Trauma Bay 3, his left arm in a sling and a fresh bandage wrapped around his forehead. His gray eyes met hers across the bustling emergency department, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade into background noise. You, Elena breathed. Me, Jake confirmed, his voice rough. I told them I wouldn't let anyone else treat me. Dr. Chen looked between them with obvious curiosity. I take it you two know each other? We've met, Elena said carefully, her professional training warring with the emotional turmoil churning in her chest. This was the man who had cost her job, whose very existence had turned her life upside down. And now he was asking for her specifically? The patient was in the military transport when it was hit, Dr. Chen explained. Mild concussion, dislocated shoulder, some lacerations. Nothing life-threatening, but he's been difficult with the other staff. Elena could imagine. Jake Morrison didn't strike her as the type to accept help gracefully, especially from people he didn't trust. But why would he trust her? I can handle it, Elena said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Dr. Chen nodded and moved away to deal with other patients, leaving Elena alone with the man who had haunted her thoughts for the past week. Why? Elena asked without preamble, approaching his bedside with cautious steps. Why did you ask for me? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on his hands. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Because I owe you, he said simply. And because I need to understand something. Understand what? Why you saved me. The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Elena picked up his chart, using the familiar routine of medical assessment to buy herself time to think. Your shoulder's been reset, she observed, checking his range of motion. How's the pain level? Elena. His voice was quiet but insistent. Please. I need to know. She met his eyes, seeing something there that made her chest tight. This wasn't the same man who had looked at her with disgust 3 nights ago. This was someone who had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, and the process had left him raw and searching. You were dying, she said finally. That's why I saved you. Because you were a human being who needed help, and I'm a nurse. It's what I do. Even though you knew what I was? Elena's hands stilled on his chart. What you were, or what you chose to be. The distinction hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd spent so many years defining himself by his hatred, by his prejudices, that he'd forgotten there was a difference between who he was and what he'd become. I saw your tattoo, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. I knew what it meant, and for a moment I hesitated. I won't lie about that. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. When someone is drowning, you don't ask if they deserve to be saved. You throw them the rope. Jake stared at her, processing the weight of her words. And I cost you your job. You didn't cost me anything. The system did that all by itself. Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. But that's not your fault. Isn't it? Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. If I hadn't been who I was, if I hadn't carried that poison around with me for so long, maybe things would have been different. Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. Around them, the emergency department continued its controlled chaos. Monitors beeping, voices calling out medical terminology, the constant shuffle of feet on linoleum. But in their small corner of Trauma Bay 3, the world had narrowed to just the 2 of them. Maybe, she said finally. But you can't change what happened. You can only decide what happens next. Before Jake could respond, Dr. Chin appeared at the foot of his bed. How's our patient doing, Elena? Stable. The shoulder reduction looks good, and his neurological signs are normal. I'd recommend keeping him for observation for a few more hours, just to be safe. Excellent. Elena, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Elena followed Dr. Chin to a quiet corner of the department, her heart racing. Had she done something wrong? Said something inappropriate? I've been watching you work, Dr. Chin said without preamble. The way you handled that patient, the way you managed a clearly complicated situation with professionalism and compassion. That's exactly what we need here. Elena blinked in surprise. I thank you. I'm offering you a position. Full-time, emergency department nurse. The pay is competitive, benefits included, and we have a policy of supporting our staff when they make difficult decisions in the field. Dr. Chen's meaning was clear. They knew about Camp Pendleton, and they didn't care. What do you say? Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. After a week of rejection and despair, someone was finally seeing her worth. Yes. Absolutely yes. Wonderful. You can start Monday. But first, finish up with your patient. He seems to respond well to you. Elena returned to Jake's bedside, her mind reeling from the sudden turn her life had taken. In the span of an hour, she'd gone from unemployed and desperate to having a real job at a respected hospital. And it was all because of the man lying in front of her, the same man who had inadvertently cost her the last job. Good news? Jake asked, reading her expression. They offered me a position. Full-time. Something that might have been relief flickered across Jake's features. That's good. You deserve it. The simple acknowledgement hit Elena harder than she'd expected. This was the first time Jake had spoken to her as an equal, as someone whose worth he recognized rather than questioned. Jake, she said, using his first name for the first time. Can I ask you something? He nodded. What happened tonight? The accident, were you? Driving to your apartment, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I've been trying to write you a letter for days, trying to figure out how to apologize, how to thank you. I finally gave up on the letter and decided to just show up. Stupid, I know. Elena stared at him, processing this revelation. You were coming to see me? To apologize. To try to make things right somehow. I know I can't undo what happened to your job, but I thought maybe. He trailed off, looking lost. I don't know what I thought. I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty of his admission, cracked something open in Elena's chest. This wasn't the hardened soldier who had looked at her with disgust. This was a man who had been forced to confront the ugliness in his own heart and was trying, however clumsily, to find his way back to something resembling decency. The letter, Elena said softly. What were you going to say? Jake met her eyes, and in them she saw years of carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. That I was wrong. About everything. About you, about people like you, about what makes someone worthy of respect. His voice cracked slightly. That you saved my life, and I repaid you by being part of the system that destroyed yours. That I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Elena felt tears threatening again, but for different reasons this time. Jake, I know it doesn't change anything, he continued, the words tumbling out like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. I know I can't take back a lifetime of being wrong, but I need you to know that what you did, saving me despite everything I represented, it changed something in me. It made me see that maybe there's still hope for people like me to become better. Elena looked at this broken, searching man and saw something she hadn't expected, possibility. Not redemption. That would take time and work and proof of change. But the possibility that people could grow, could choose to be better than they'd been. The first step, she said quietly, is admitting you were wrong. You've done that. What's the second step? Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in days. That's up to you to figure out. But Jake, you don't have to figure it out alone. For the first time since the accident, Jake Morrison felt something that might have been hope. The hospital cafeteria at 6 a.m. was a liminal space, caught between the night shift's exhaustion and the day shift's fresh energy. Elena sat across from Jake at a corner table, 2 cups of terrible coffee growing cold between them. He'd been discharged an hour ago, but neither of them seemed ready to leave. You don't have to stay, Elena said, though her voice lacked conviction. I'm sure you have people waiting to hear from you. Jake's laugh was bitter. Not really. My ex-wife made it pretty clear she never wanted to see me again. My parents. He shrugged. Let's just say we don't talk much anymore. What happened? With your ex-wife, I mean. Elena wasn't sure why she was asking. Maybe because the vulnerability in his voice made her want to understand the man behind the hatred. Jake stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. Her name was Michelle. We met right after my second deployment. I was different then. Still angry, still carrying all this rage from overseas, but I hadn't let it poison everything yet. He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. She was a teacher. Elementary school. She had this way of seeing the good in everyone, even me. For a while, I thought maybe she could fix whatever was broken inside me. But she couldn't. No. Nobody can fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. Jake's voice was heavy with regret. The worse I got, the harder she tried. She'd invite her co-workers over, people from all different backgrounds. Thinking if I just got to know them, I'd see they were just regular people. But I was so deep in my own poison by then, I saw every dinner party as an attack on who I was. Elena felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen this pattern before, people who wore their prejudice like armor, who interpreted every act of inclusion as an act of aggression. What broke it? She asked quietly. Jake was silent for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She got pregnant. Elena's breath caught. Jake, we were so happy at first. Michelle started talking about names, about what kind of world we wanted to bring our child into. And that's when it hit me. What if our kid didn't look like me? What if they had Michelle's darker hair, her olive skin? What if people looked at our family and saw something mixed? The shame in his voice was palpable. Elena wanted to reach across the table, to offer some kind of comfort, but she wasn't sure he'd accept it. I started saying things, Jake continued. Terrible things about what our child might face, about how hard it would be for them if they didn't fit into neat categories. I told myself I was being practical, preparing for reality. But Michelle saw right through me. She left. She lost the baby first. Miscarriage at 12 weeks. Jake's voice cracked. And instead of grieving together, instead of supporting each other, I said it was probably for the best. That maybe it wasn't meant to be. Elena felt sick. Oh, Jake. She looked at me like she'd never seen me before. Like I was a stranger who had somehow replaced the man she married. And maybe I was. Jake finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. She packed her bags that night. Said she couldn't be married to someone who would see their own child as a problem to be solved. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of Jake's confession. Elena tried to imagine the pain Michelle must have felt, losing a child and a husband in the same moment, realizing that the man she'd loved was capable of such cruelty. Where is she now? Elena asked. Remarried. To a good man, a teacher like her. They have 2 kids. Jake's smile was sad but genuine. I see their pictures sometimes on social media. She looks happy. Really happy. The way she never looked with me. Elena studied his face, seeing the genuine remorse there. Do you regret it? What you said. Every day. But not just because I lost her, because of what it revealed about who I'd become. I'd turned into the kind of man who could look at an unborn child and see a burden instead of a blessing. Who could take the woman I claimed to love and make her feel ashamed of who she was. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Jake Morrison wasn't just a racist soldier who'd been forced to confront his prejudices. He was a man who had lost everything to his own hatred and was finally beginning to understand the true cost. What about you? Jake asked, his voice tentative. What made you become a nurse? Elena hesitated. She'd shared her professional story countless times, the desire to help people, the satisfaction of healing, but the real story was more complicated, more personal. My brother, she said finally. Miguel. He was 2 years older than me, and he was everything I wasn't. Confident, outgoing, popular. He had this way of making everyone around him feel special. She smiled at the memory, but there was sadness in it. When I was 16, Miguel started having these episodes. Panic attacks, we thought at first. But they got worse, hallucinations, paranoia, violent outbursts. My parents didn't know what to do. In our community, mental illness wasn't something you talked about. It was shameful. Jake leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her words. We took him to the emergency room 3 times before anyone would listen to us. The first 2 times, they saw a young Latino man acting erratically and assumed drugs. They didn't run tests, didn't ask questions. They just sedated him and sent him home with pamphlets about addiction. Elena's voice grew harder, edged with old anger. The 3rd time, he tried to hurt himself. Really hurt himself. That's when they finally took us seriously, finally ran the tests that showed he had early-onset schizophrenia. I'm sorry, Jake said, and Elena could hear that he meant it. The nurse who treated him that night, her name was Patricia Williams. She was this older black woman who had probably seen every kind of prejudice and dismissal you could imagine. But she looked at Miguel, really looked at him, and she saw a sick young man who needed help, not a stereotype to be managed. Elena's eyes filled with tears at the memory. She stayed with us for hours, explaining his condition, helping us understand what treatment would look like. She made sure we knew it wasn't our fault, that mental illness doesn't discriminate. And when my parents started talking about shame and what the neighbors would think, she sat them down and explained that the only shameful thing would be not getting Miguel the help he needed. She sounds like an amazing person. She was. She became like a second mother to our family. Miguel stabilized on medication, went back to school, even got married. He's a social worker now, helping other families navigate the system. Elena wiped her eyes. Patricia died 5 years ago, cancer. But at her funeral, there were hundreds of people. Families she'd helped, patients she'd advocated for, young nurses she'd mentored. She'd spent her whole career being the person she wished had been there for her when she was young and scared and facing a system that didn't see her worth. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing the story. That's why you became a nurse. To be Patricia Williams for someone else. Exactly. And that's why I couldn't let you die, even knowing what you represented. Because Patricia taught me that healing isn't about judging who deserves care. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone, even when they can't see it in themselves. The words hung between them like a bridge. Jake stared at Elena, seeing her not just as the woman who had saved his life, but as someone who had chosen a path of healing in response to pain, who had turned her family's trauma into a mission of compassion. I don't deserve that kind of grace, he said quietly. Maybe not, Elena agreed, her honesty gentle but unflinching. But that's not really the point, is it? Grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to see possibility where others see only problems. Jake felt something crack open in his chest. A wall he'd built so carefully over the years, brick by brick, slight by slight, disappointment by disappointment. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt the possibility of becoming someone different, someone better. Elena, he said, her name feeling different on his tongue now. Not a label or a category, but the name of a person who had shown him what real strength looked like. I want to change. I want to be better. But I don't know how. Elena looked at this broken man across from her and saw something she recognized. The same desperate hope she'd seen in her brother's eyes when he'd first been diagnosed. The same fear and determination that had driven her to become a nurse in the first place. The first step, she said, echoing her earlier words, is admitting you need to change. You've done that. What's the second step? Elena smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, it reached her eyes. The second step is doing the work. And Jake, that's going to be the hardest part. We're seeing the real people behind the pain now. Both Elena and Jake have been shaped by loss and trauma, but they've chosen different paths. What do you think it takes for someone to truly change? Share your thoughts in the comments, because Jake's about to find out just how hard real transformation can be. Outside the hospital windows, the sun was rising over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a new day, full of possibility and promise. And for the first time in years, both Elena Rodriguez and Jake Morrison felt like they might be worthy of the light. 2 weeks later, Elena was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay for when she heard a familiar voice at the nurse's station. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Elena Rodriguez?" She turned to see Jake Morrison standing awkwardly by the reception desk, holding a small potted plant and looking completely out of place in the bustling emergency department. He was in civilian clothes, jeans and a simple blue button-down, and without his military bearing, he seemed younger, more uncertain. "Jake." Elena approached cautiously, aware that several of her colleagues were watching with curiosity. "What are you doing here?" He held up the plant, a small succulent in a ceramic pot painted with bright Mexican tiles. "I brought you this. A thank you gift. I know it's not much, but I remembered you mentioning that your apartment doesn't get much light, and these don't need much sun." Elena stared at the offering, touched despite herself. It was such a small gesture, but the thoughtfulness behind it, remembering a casual comment about her living situation, choosing something that would thrive in her circumstances, spoke to a level of attention she hadn't expected. That's really sweet, Jake. Thank you. There's something else," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to get coffee sometime." "Not here," he added quickly, glancing around at the hospital setting. "Somewhere neutral. I have some things I'd like to tell you, and I thought maybe you might have questions for me." Elena hesitated. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of orientation at St. Mary's, learning new protocols, meeting new colleagues. She'd thrown herself into work, trying not to think about the complicated feelings Jake Morrison had stirred up. But here he was, standing in her workplace with a plant and an invitation, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I get off at 7, she said finally. "There's a cafe called Luna's about 6 blocks from here. Do you know it?" "I'll find it." Jake's relief was palpable. 7:30. 7:30. Luna's cafe was the kind of place that felt like a warm hug, mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the rich aroma of coffee beans and fresh pastries. Elena arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could talk without being overheard. She'd changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a soft green sweater, and she found herself nervous in a way she couldn't quite explain. Jake arrived exactly on time, scanning the cafe until he spotted her. As he approached the table, Elena noticed he was carrying a manila folder along with his coffee. "Thank you for coming," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Elena admitted. But curiosity won out. Jake nodded, understanding. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night at the hospital. About what you said, about doing the work. I wanted to show you what that looks like." He opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. Elena could see they were printed articles, handwritten notes, and what looked like contact information. "I've been reading," Jake said, his voice careful. "About implicit bias, about the history I never learned in school, about the experiences of people like you. I know reading articles doesn't make me an expert, and it doesn't erase what I've done, but I wanted to understand." Elena picked up one of the articles. a piece about healthcare disparities in communities of color. The margins were filled with Jake's handwriting, questions and observations that showed he'd been genuinely engaging with the material. "This one hit me hard," Jake said, pointing to another article about military veterans struggling with PTSD and how it could manifest as anger and prejudice. I recognized myself in it, not as an excuse, but as an explanation. I think I've been using my anger as a shield for so long that I forgot what I was actually angry about. "What were you angry about?" Elena asked softly. Jake was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. "My dad died when I was overseas. Second deployment. Heart attack. I was supposed to come home on leave the week after it happened, but the mission got extended. I missed his funeral, missed being there for my mom, missed everything." Elena felt her heart clench. "I'm sorry. The thing is, my dad wasn't a good man. He was the one who taught me to hate, who filled my head with all that poison about other people. But he was still my father, and I loved him despite everything. When he died, I was angry at the world, angry at the military for keeping me away, angry at myself for not being there." Jake's voice grew quieter. It was easier to blame other people, immigrants, minorities, anyone who looked different, than to deal with the real pain. The grief, the guilt, the feeling that I'd failed as a son. Hate was simpler than healing. Elena reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "Grief makes us do strange things. It doesn't excuse the choices you made, but I understand how pain can twist into something ugly." "There's more," Jake said, pulling out another sheet of paper. "I've been going to therapy. VA counselor who specializes in helping veterans deal with trauma and reintegration. Her name is Dr. Martinez, and she's been helping me understand how my military training, my family background, and my unprocessed grief all combined to create this person I became." Elena looked at the paper. It was a treatment plan with goals and milestones clearly outlined. "How long have you been going?" "Since the day after I got out of the hospital. Twice a week. It's hard, Elena. Really hard. She makes me confront things I've been running from for years. But I'm starting to see how much damage I've done, not just to other people, but to myself." Elena studied his face, seeing the exhaustion there, but also something else, a kind of determined hope. "What does she say about people like me? About the possibility of real change?" Jake met her eyes directly. "She says that recognizing the problem is the first step, but it's not enough. She says I have to actively work to undo the patterns I've built, to challenge my assumptions every day. And she says I have to accept that some people may never forgive me, and that's their right. And how do you feel about that?" "Terrified," Jake admitted with a shaky laugh. "But also relieved? For the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just running away from pain." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not trust, exactly, but the possibility of trust. This wasn't the same man who had looked at her with disgust 2 weeks ago. This was someone who was doing the hard work of examining his own soul and finding it wanting. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Anything. That night at the hospital, you said you were driving to my apartment. How did you even know where I lived?" Jake's cheeks flushed slightly. I may have asked around. Called some people who knew people. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't trying to stalk you or anything. I just needed to find you, to apologize in person. And what were you going to say? If you'd made it to my door." Jake pulled out one more sheet of paper. This one covered in his handwriting, crossed out and rewritten multiple times. "I wrote it down. Practiced it. Want to hear it?" Elena nodded. Jake cleared his throat and began to read. "Elena Rodriguez, my name is Jake Morrison. You saved my life 2 weeks ago, and I repaid your kindness by being part of a system that cost you your job. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the harm I've caused. But I need you to know that what you did, choosing to save someone who had given you every reason to hate him, it changed something fundamental in me. You showed me what real strength looks like, what real courage looks like. And I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to become worthy of the grace you showed me." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The words were simple, honest, and completely without the defensiveness or self-pity she might have expected. "That's beautiful, Jake. Dr. Martinez helped me write it. She said I needed to focus on acknowledging the harm I'd caused rather than trying to make myself feel better." Jake folded the paper carefully. "She also said that if you were willing to talk to me, I should listen more than I speak. So, I'm listening." Elena took a sip of her coffee, buying time to organize her thoughts. I want to understand something. When you saw me that night, when you realized who had saved you, what was your first thought? Jake winced. Honestly, I was angry. Not at you exactly, but at the situation. I felt diminished somehow. Like accepting help from you made me less than what I thought I was. And now I realize that the only thing that diminished me was my own prejudice. You didn't make me smaller. You made me see how small I'd already become. Jake leaned forward, his voice intense. Elena, you are one of the strongest, most compassionate people I've ever met. The fact that you chose to save me despite everything I represented, that's not something that makes me feel diminished. It makes me feel humbled and grateful and determined to become someone worthy of that kind of grace. Elena felt her walls beginning to crack. This wasn't the performance of someone trying to manipulate her. This was the raw honesty of someone who had looked into the darkness of his own heart and decided to choose light instead. I have a confession, Elena said. I've been thinking about you too. Not in a romantic way, she added quickly, seeing his expression, but wondering if people can really change. If someone who's carried that much hate can genuinely let it go. And what conclusion did you reach? Elena smiled, the first truly warm smile she'd given him. I think I'm looking at the answer. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of honesty settling between them like a bridge finally strong enough to bear their combined weight. Jake, Elena said finally, I want to show you something. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for, a picture of her family at her nephew's birthday party. This is my family. My sister Maria, her husband Carlos, their 3 kids. My parents, my brother Miguel, the one I told you about. Jake studied the photo, seeing the obvious love and joy radiating from the group. They look happy. They are. But they're also the people your old worldview would have dismissed, would have seen as problems to be solved rather than human beings to be celebrated. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. Miguel is a social worker who helps homeless veterans, including white veterans who sometimes struggle with accepting help from someone who looks like him. Maria teaches in a school where half the kids don't speak English as their first language, and she helps them find their voices. My parents clean office buildings at night so their grandchildren can have opportunities they never had. Jake felt the full weight of what she was showing him. Not just a family photo, but a window into the lives he'd been taught to devalue. They sound like incredible people. They are. And Jake, they're not unusual. Every community has people like this. People who are working to make the world better, who are raising children with love and hope, who are contributing in ways that matter. The narrative you were taught, the one that says some people are worth less than others, it's not just wrong, it's a lie designed to keep you from seeing the truth. Jake stared at the photo, feeling something fundamental shift in his understanding. These weren't statistics or abstractions. These were real people with real lives, real dreams, real value. And he'd spent years dismissing their worth based on nothing more than the color of their skin and the sound of their names. I want to meet them, he said suddenly, then caught himself. I mean someday. If they would be willing. I know I have no right to ask, but I want to understand the world you come from. I want to see what I've been missing. Elena felt her heart skip. This was more than she'd dared to hope for, not just acknowledgement of his past wrongs, but genuine curiosity about her world, her people, her truth. Maybe, she said carefully. But Jake, that's not something you earn quickly. Trust is built slowly, especially when it's been broken as badly as this. I understand. I'm not asking for trust one haven't earned. I'm just asking for the chance to try. Elena looked at this man across from her, this complicated, damaged, hopeful man who was trying so hard to become someone better, and felt something she hadn't expected. The beginning of genuine affection. Okay, she said. Let's see what happens. Jake's smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Thank you, Elena. For everything. For saving my life, for giving me a chance to explain, for showing me what real grace looks like. Don't thank me yet, Elena said with a small laugh. The real work is just beginning. But as they sat in the warm glow of Luna's cafe, sharing stories and tentative smiles, both of them felt something they hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not the naive hope that ignores reality, but the hard-won hope that comes from choosing to believe in the possibility of redemption, even when the path forward is uncertain. Sometimes the most unlikely connections can teach us the most about ourselves. Elena and Jake are finding common ground in their shared humanity. Have you ever had someone challenge your assumptions about who deserves compassion? Let me know in the comments, because their journey is about to face its biggest test yet. Outside, the San Diego evening was settling into twilight, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. And inside Luna's cafe, two people who had every reason to remain strangers were discovering that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected places. 3 weeks had passed since that evening at Luna's cafe, and Elena found herself looking forward to Jake's visits more than she cared to admit. He'd started stopping by the hospital during her breaks, bringing coffee and updates on his therapy sessions. Their conversations had grown easier, more natural, and Elena had begun to see glimpses of the man Jake might have been if he'd never learned to hate. She was reviewing patient charts when her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can we meet tonight? Something happened. I need to talk to you." The urgency in his message made her stomach clench. Elena quickly typed back, "Luna's at 8? Yes. Thank you." Elena arrived at the cafe to find Jake already there, hunched over a corner table with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. His face was pale, his usual careful composure replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. "Jake." Elena slid into the seat across from him, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" He looked up, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart sink. Shame, fear, and the kind of desperation that came from watching your carefully rebuilt world crumble. "I screwed up," he said, his voice hoarse. "I screwed up so badly, Elena. Everything we've been building, everything I've been working toward. I think I just destroyed it all." Elena felt a chill of foreboding. "Tell me what happened." Jake took a shaky breath. "There was an incident at the base today. A training exercise went wrong, and one of the recruits, a young black Marine named Johnson, got hurt. Nothing serious, just a sprained ankle, but he needed help getting to the medical station." Elena waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I was the closest instructor, so I went to help him. And Elena, for just a moment, when I saw him lying there, I hesitated. Just like you did with me, but for all the wrong reasons." Jake's voice cracked. "For one horrible second, my old programming kicked in, and I thought, why should I help him?" Elena felt her stomach drop. "But you did help him, right?" "Yes, of course I did. I caught myself, pushed past it, got him the help he needed. But Elena, someone saw. Another instructor, Staff Sergeant Williams. He's black, been in the service for 15 years. He saw me hesitate, saw the look on my face, and he knew exactly what it meant." Jake's hands were trembling now. "After we got Johnson to medical, Williams pulled me aside. He said he'd heard rumors about me, about my past associations. Said he'd been watching me, waiting to see if I was really different or just better at hiding it." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what was coming. "He told me he was filing a report. Said that someone with my history had no business being around young Marines, especially Marines of color. Said he was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of man I really was." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the implications. Elena felt her carefully constructed hope beginning to crumble. This was what she'd been afraid of, that Jake's change was surface level, that when tested, his old prejudices would resurface. "Elena," Jake said, his voice desperate, "I know how this sounds. I know what you must be thinking. But I swear to you, that moment of hesitation, it wasn't who I am anymore. It was just muscle memory, a reflex from years of conditioning that I'm still fighting to overcome." Elena stared at him, trying to process her emotions. Part of her wanted to believe him, to accept that change was messy and nonlinear. But another part, the part that had been hurt too many times by people who claimed to be different, was screaming warnings. "How do I know that?" she asked quietly. "How do I know this isn't who you really are when no one's watching?" Jake flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Because I'm telling you. Because I came here tonight to confess something I could have hidden. Because I'm more disgusted with myself right now than you could ever be." "That's not enough, Jake." Elena's voice was steady, but inside she was breaking. "Don't you see? This is exactly what I was afraid of. That underneath all the therapy and the reading and the pretty words, you're still the same person who looked at me with disgust that night. That's not true, isn't it?" Elena's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from other patrons. She lowered it, but the intensity remained. "You hesitated to help an injured Marine because of the color of his skin. How is that different from what you've always been?" Jake looked stricken. "Because I recognized it was wrong. Because I fought against it. Because I hate that part of myself, and I'm working every day to kill it. But it's still there, isn't it? That poison is still in your system, just waiting for the right moment to surface. Elena felt tears threatening. Jake, I wanted to believe you could change. I wanted to believe that people could overcome that kind of hatred. But maybe some damage is just too deep to heal. Elena, please. No. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't do this. I can't keep hoping that you'll become someone different when the evidence keeps showing me that you're exactly who you've always been. Jake stood too, his face desperate. One moment of weakness doesn't erase weeks of progress. It doesn't invalidate everything I've been working toward. Doesn't it? Elena's voice was cold now, protective walls slamming back into place. That moment of weakness could have cost that young Marine his life if the situation had been more serious. Your hesitation, your prejudice, it's not just a personal failing, Jake. It's dangerous. It hurts people. I know that. God, Elena, I know that better than anyone. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm telling you. You're telling me because you got caught. Because someone saw through your act, and now you're scared. Elena grabbed her purse, needing to get away before she said something she couldn't take back. I thought you were different. I thought you were actually changing. But you're just better at hiding who you really are. Elena, wait. But she was already walking away, leaving Jake standing alone in the cafe with the wreckage of everything they'd been building scattered around his feet. Elena made it to her car before the tears came. She sat in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel and sobbing with a grief that surprised her with its intensity. She'd known this was a risk, known that trusting Jake Morrison was a gamble that could end in heartbreak. But somewhere along the way, she'd started to believe in the possibility of his redemption. She'd started to care about him. And that made his failure feel like a betrayal not just of her trust, but of her hope that people could genuinely change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Please let me explain. This isn't what you think. Elena deleted the message without responding. Another text. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please don't give up on me. I'm not the same person I was. Delete. Elena, I'm begging you. Don't let one moment of weakness destroy everything we've built. Elena turned off her phone and drove home through the blurry haze of tears. Back at the cafe, Jake sat alone at their table, staring at his phone and watching his messages go unanswered. Around him, life continued, couples sharing dessert, friends laughing over coffee, families enjoying evening treats. But Jake felt like he was watching it all from behind glass, separated from the warmth and connection he'd briefly thought might be possible for someone like him. He thought about calling Dr. Martinez, his therapist, but what would he say? That he'd had a moment of weakness and lost the one person who'd believed in his capacity for change? That he'd proven Elena right? That some people were too damaged to deserve redemption? Jake pulled out his wallet and left money on the table, then walked out into the San Diego night. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of ocean salt and blooming jasmine. It was the kind of evening that should have felt full of possibility, but all Jake felt was the crushing weight of his own failures. He'd come so far, worked so hard to become someone better. But in one moment of weakness, one reflexive hesitation, he'd revealed that the poison was still there, still lurking beneath the surface of his carefully constructed new identity. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe some damage was too deep to heal. Maybe he was fooling himself to think he could ever be anything other than what his father had raised him to be. Jake walked to his car, feeling more alone than he had in years. He'd lost Elena's trust, probably lost his career, and worst of all, he'd lost faith in his own capacity for change. But as he sat in his car, staring at the cafe where he'd just watched his hopes crumble, Jake made a decision. He could give up, could let this moment define him and prove Elena right. Or he could use this failure as fuel, could let it drive him to work even harder to become the man he wanted to be. Elena might never forgive him. Hell, he might never forgive himself. But that didn't mean he had to stop trying to change. It just meant the work was harder than he'd thought, and the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. Jake started his car and drove toward the VA hospital, where Dr. Martinez had told him she kept emergency hours for veterans in crisis. He had a lot of work to do, and he was finally beginning to understand that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice, and he'd have to make it every day for the rest of his life. Whether Elena would ever be there to witness his progress was no longer up to him. But he owed it to himself, to the young Marine he'd hesitated to help, and to every person he'd ever wronged to keep trying, even if he had to do it alone. Elena hadn't slept in 3 days. She moved through her shifts at St. Mary's like a ghost, mechanically checking vitals and administering medications while her mind replayed that terrible conversation at Luna's cafe on an endless loop. Her colleagues had started to notice. Dr. Chen had pulled her aside twice to ask if she was feeling well, and even the usually oblivious residents were giving her concerned looks. She was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay 2 when her phone rang. Unknown number. Elena Rodriguez? Yes. This is Dr. Carmen Martinez from the VA Medical Center. I'm calling about Jake Morrison. Elena's heart stopped. Is he okay? Physically, yes. But Elena, he's been in my office every day since Tuesday, and I'm concerned about his mental state. He told me what happened between you two, and I think there are some things you need to know. Elena sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. I don't think. Please, just listen. Jake has given me permission to share some details of his treatment with you, because he believes you deserve to understand what really happened that day. Against her better judgment, Elena found herself listening. Jake has been diagnosed with complex PTSD, Dr. Martinez continued. His symptoms include hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, and what we call cognitive flashbacks, moments where his brain reverts to old patterns of thinking under stress, even when his conscious mind knows better. Elena felt something twist in her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that what happened with the injured Marine wasn't a choice Jake made, it was a trauma response. His brain, under stress, defaulted to old programming that he's been working incredibly hard to overcome. The fact that he recognized it, fought through it, and then came to you immediately to confess shows remarkable progress, not failure. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the foundation of her anger beginning to shift. But he still hesitated. He still had that moment of, Elena, recovery from this kind of deep-seated conditioning isn't linear. It's not a switch that gets flipped and suddenly everything is different. It's a daily battle against neural pathways that were carved deep by years of trauma and indoctrination. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. Jake is fighting a war in his own mind every single day, and he's winning more battles than he's losing. That moment of hesitation? It lasted 3 seconds. 3 years ago, he might not have helped at all. Elena felt tears starting to fall. Why are you telling me this? Because Jake is in my office right now, and he's convinced that he's irredeemably broken. He's talking about giving up on therapy, giving up on change, giving up on the possibility that he could ever be worthy of someone's love. And Elena, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen someone work as hard as Jake has been working to become a better person. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. He said that? About giving up? He said that losing your trust was proof that he'll never be able to escape what he was. That maybe some people are just too damaged to deserve redemption. Dr. Martinez paused. Elena, I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you that Jake Morrison is not the same man who looked at you with disgust a month ago. He's someone who's fighting every day to become worthy of the grace you showed him. The question is whether you're willing to fight alongside him. Elena ended the call and sat in the empty trauma bay, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she understood about that night at the cafe was shifting, rearranging itself into a different picture entirely. Jake hadn't chosen to hesitate. His damaged brain had betrayed him, and he'd fought through it anyway. And instead of hiding his failure, he'd come to her immediately, desperate to maintain the honesty that had become the foundation of their relationship. She thought about her brother Miguel, about the years of medication adjustments and therapy sessions, about the times his illness had made him say or do things that weren't really him. She'd never blamed Miguel for his symptoms. She'd seen them as something he was fighting against, not something he was choosing. Why was she holding Jake to a different standard? Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages Jake had sent over the past 3 days. Messages she'd deleted without reading. But her phone kept copies in the trash folder, and now she opened them one by one. Elena, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please don't give up on me. I'm not the same person I was. I understand if you can't trust me anymore. But please know that losing you feels like losing the best part of myself. I'm going to keep working to become better, even if you're not there to see it. You taught me what real strength looks like, and I won't dishonor that by giving up. I love you. I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. I love your compassion, your strength, your refusal to accept less than people's best selves. You made me want to be worthy of that kind of love. Elena stared at the last message, her heart hammering against her ribs. He loved her. This complicated, damaged, desperately trying man loved her, and she'd walked away from him at the moment he needed her most. She thought about Patricia Williams, the nurse who had saved her brother's life by seeing past his symptoms to the person underneath. Patricia had never given up on the difficult patients, the ones whose illness made them angry or suspicious or hard to love. She'd understood that healing required patience, that setbacks were part of the process, that love sometimes meant holding on when everything in you wanted to let go. Elena wiped her eyes and made a decision. The VA Medical Center was a sprawling complex of buildings that smelled like disinfectant and institutional coffee. Elena found Dr. Martinez's office on the 3rd floor, her heart pounding as she knocked on the door. "Come in." Dr. Martinez was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked up from her desk and smiled. "Elena Rodriguez, I presume?" "Yes." "Is Jake? Is he still here?" "He's in the waiting room. Has been for the past hour, just sitting there staring at the wall. I think he's afraid to leave because he doesn't know what to do with himself." Dr. Martinez studied Elena's face. "Are you here to see him?" "I think so. Yes. I need to talk to him." "Elena, before you do, I want you to understand something. Jake is fragile right now. More fragile than he's been since he started treatment. If you're not sure about this, if there's any chance you're going to change your mind again, please don't give him hope just to take it away." Elena met the therapist's eyes. "I'm sure." Dr. Martinez nodded and led Elena down the hall to a small waiting area. Jake was sitting in a corner chair, still wearing the same clothes from 3 days ago, his hair disheveled and his face hollow with exhaustion. He looked up when they approached, and Elena saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. "Jake," Dr. Martinez said gently, "you have a visitor." Jake's gaze found Elena's, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Elena crossed the room and sat in the chair next to his. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." Jake's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't. I was angry and hurt and scared that I'd been wrong about you." Elena took a shaky breath. "But then Dr. Martinez called, and she helped me understand some things I should have understood on my own." Jake's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I know that moment of hesitation proved everything you were afraid of." "No." Elena reached over and took his hand, feeling how cold his fingers were. "It proved that you're human, that recovery is hard and messy and nonlinear, that the brain you're fighting against was shaped by years of trauma and conditioning that can't be erased overnight." Jake stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "But I failed. I let my old programming surface, even for just a moment. And then you fought through it. You helped that Marine, you recognized what had happened, and you came to me immediately to confess. Jake, that's not failure. That's incredible progress." Elena shifted in her chair to face him fully. "I've been thinking about my brother Miguel. When he was first diagnosed with schizophrenia, he had episodes where his illness made him paranoid, made him say things that weren't really him. I never blamed him for those moments. I understood they were symptoms of something he was fighting against, not choices he was making." Jake's tears were falling freely now. "Elena, I should have given you the same grace I gave him. I should have seen that moment of hesitation as evidence of how hard you're fighting, not how little you've changed." Elena's own voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm sorry I walked away when you needed me most." Jake pulled his hands free and covered his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elena moved to the chair beside him and wrapped her arms around him, holding him while he cried out weeks of fear and self-doubt and desperate hope. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered against her shoulder. "I thought I'd proven that I was exactly what you were afraid I was." "You could never lose me that easily," Elena murmured, stroking his hair. "I love you too, Jake. I love how hard you're fighting to become better. I love your honesty, your willingness to face the ugliest parts of yourself. I love the man you're becoming." Jake pulled back to look at her, his eyes red but filled with something that looked like wonder. "You love me. I love you. Not despite your struggles, but because of how you're facing them. Because you're choosing to fight for something better every single day." Jake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," Elena said with a watery smile. "But love isn't about deserving, it's about choosing. And I choose you, Jake Morrison. I choose to fight alongside you, to celebrate your victories and help you through your setbacks. I choose to believe in the man you're becoming." Jake kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of gratitude. It tasted like tears and hope, and the promise of something beautiful being built from the wreckage of what they'd both been before. When they broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. "But Jake, we do this together. No more hiding, no more shame spirals, no more trying to handle everything alone. If we're going to make this work, we have to trust each other with the messy parts." "Together," Jake agreed, his voice steady for the first time in days. "I promise." Elena smiled and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Come on, let's go home." As they walked out of the VA medical center together, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because their path would be easy, but because they'd chosen to walk it together. Love, she realized, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for, and then doing the work every single day to build something beautiful together. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about broken people choosing to heal together. Elena and Jake have made their choice. What do you think makes a relationship worth fighting for? Share your thoughts in the comments, because their story is about to reach its beautiful conclusion. 6 months later, the community center in Elena's old neighborhood buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Saturday morning health fair. Tables lined the gymnasium, staffed by volunteers offering everything from blood pressure screenings to nutrition counseling. Children ran between the booths while their parents waited in line for free services, and the air hummed with conversations in both English and Spanish. Elena stood behind the vaccination table, drawing doses of flu vaccine into syringes while chatting with Mrs. Gutierrez, an elderly woman who'd been her neighbor growing up. "Mija, you look happy," Mrs. Gutierrez observed in Spanish, rolling up her sleeve. "There's a light in your eyes that wasn't there before." Elena smiled, thinking of Jake, who was across the room helping set up chairs for the diabetes education presentation. "I am happy, Senora. Really happy. And that young man, the one who keeps looking over here like you might disappear." Mrs. Gutierrez nodded toward Jake. "He's the one." Elena followed her gaze to where Jake was carefully arranging chairs in neat rows, occasionally glancing over to catch her eye and smile. He'd been nervous about today, his first time in Elena's neighborhood, meeting her community. But watching him now, she could see him relaxing as people accepted his help with grateful smiles. "He's the one," Elena confirmed, administering the vaccine with practiced ease. "Good. A woman needs a man who looks at her like she hung the moon." Mrs. Gutierrez patted Elena's hand. "Your grandmother would be proud, Mija. You chose love over fear." The health fair had been Jake's idea, born from one of their late-night conversations about how to make real change in the world. Elena had mentioned the lack of accessible health care in her old neighborhood, and Jake had immediately started researching grant opportunities and volunteer organizations. Within a month, he'd helped coordinate this event, using his military organizational skills to bring together doctors, nurses, and community volunteers. "You know," Dr. Chen said, appearing at Elena's elbow with a cup of coffee, "when you first told me about Jake, I was skeptical. But watching him today..." She gestured toward where Jake was now kneeling beside a young boy who'd scraped his knee, carefully cleaning the wound while making the child laugh. "That's not the behavior of someone who's just going through the motions." Elena watched Jake work, her heart swelling with pride. The past 6 months had been a journey of small victories and occasional setbacks, but through it all, Jake had remained committed to becoming better. He'd continued therapy, started volunteering with veteran support groups, and slowly begun building genuine friendships with people from all backgrounds. "He's not the same person he was," Elena said softly. "But then again, neither am I." Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "I used to think that love meant accepting people exactly as they are, never asking them to change. But Jake taught me that real love sometimes means believing in someone's capacity to grow, even when they don't believe in it themselves." Elena smiled. "He's made me braver, more willing to take risks on people's potential for good." As the afternoon wound down and volunteers began packing up supplies, Elena found herself standing in the parking lot with her sister Maria, watching Jake help load medical equipment into Dr. Chen's van. "I like him," Maria said without preamble. "I wasn't sure I would, given everything you told me about his past. But Elena, the way he looks at you, and more importantly, the way he looks at our kids, at our community. That's not something you can fake." Elena nodded, remembering the moment earlier when Jake had spent 20 minutes helping Maria's youngest son, Diego, with a science project he'd brought to show Elena. Jake had listened with genuine interest as 8-year-old Diego explained his volcano model, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement. He's good with children, Elena observed. He's good with people, period. And that tells me everything I need to know about who he really is now. Maria squeezed Elena's arm. Mama wants to invite him to Sunday dinner next week. Elena's eyes widened. Sunday dinner with the Rodriguez family was sacred, a weekly gathering where 3 generations crowded around Maria's dining room table, sharing food and stories and unconditional love. It was where boyfriends were evaluated, where acceptance was earned, where family bonds were strengthened. Are you sure she's ready for that? Elena, he spent the morning giving free medical care to our neighbors, speaking broken Spanish with the elderly ladies, and playing soccer with the kids during his lunch break. If that doesn't prove his heart is in the right place, nothing will. That evening, Elena and Jake sat on the small balcony of her apartment, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the San Diego sky in shades of gold and pink. Jake had changed out of his volunteer t-shirt into a soft blue button-down that brought out his eyes, and Elena couldn't help but marvel at how different he looked from the hardened soldier she'd first met. "Thank you," Jake said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "For what?" "For today. For letting me be part of this. For introducing me to your world." Jake took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. 6 months ago, I would have driven through this neighborhood and seen only problems. Today, I saw Mrs. Gutierrez's wisdom and little Diego's curiosity and the way your community takes care of each other. I saw what I've been missing my whole life. Elena leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with the lingering smell of antiseptic from the health fair. What have you been missing? Connection. Real connection with people who are different from me. I spent so many years building walls, telling myself that keeping people out made me strong. But Elena, today I felt more like myself than I have in years. Not the person I was trained to be, not the person my father wanted me to be, but the person I actually am underneath all that armor. Elena tilted her head to look at him. And who is that person? Jake was quiet for a moment, considering. Someone who wants to help. Someone who finds joy in making other people's lives a little easier. Someone who believes that we're all connected, that what hurts one of us hurts all of us. He smiled. Someone who's grateful every day for the woman who saw past his worst self to the person he could become. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Jake, I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. Elena's heart skipped, wondering if this was the moment she'd been half expecting for weeks. But instead of a ring box, Jake pulled out a folded piece of paper. "What is it?" "A letter. From Staff Sergeant Williams, the man who filed the report about me." Jake's voice was steady, but Elena could hear the emotion underneath. "He asked me to give it to you." Elena unfolded the paper, recognizing the crisp handwriting of someone accustomed to military precision. Asterisk, Ms. Rodriguez. "I hope this letter finds you well. Jake Morrison asked me to write to you, and after much consideration, I agreed. 6 months ago, I filed a report questioning Jake's fitness for duty based on what I perceived as racially motivated hesitation in helping an injured Marine. I stand by that decision. At the time, I believed Jake represented a danger to the young men and women under his influence. However, I feel compelled to share what I have observed since then. Jake requested a meeting with me 2 weeks after the incident. He didn't come to defend himself or make excuses. Instead, he apologized, not just for that moment of hesitation, but for the years of prejudice that led to it. He asked if I would be willing to help him understand the impact of his actions, to educate him about the experiences of Marines of color in our military. I agreed, expecting it to be a single conversation. Instead, Jake has met with me every week for the past 6 months. He has listened to stories that were difficult to hear, asked questions that revealed his own ignorance, and slowly, painfully, begun to understand the harm that people like him have caused. More importantly, he has taken action. Jake has become an advocate for diversity and inclusion training in our unit. He has mentored young Marines from all backgrounds, using his position to create opportunities for those who might otherwise be overlooked. He has turned his own transformation into a teaching tool, helping other veterans recognize and overcome their own biases. Ms. Rodriguez, I have been in the military for 23 years. I have seen many people claim to have changed, only to revert to their old patterns when tested. Jake Morrison is not one of those people. His change is real, deep, and permanent. I wanted you to know this because Jake speaks of you often, always with the deepest respect and gratitude. He credits you with saving not just his life, but his soul. And having watched his journey these past months, I believe he's right. You chose to see the humanity in someone who had forgotten his own. That act of grace didn't just save Jake, it rippled outward, touching every life he's influenced since. The young Marines he's mentored, the veterans he's counseled, the community members he served today. They've all been impacted by your decision to choose love over hate. Thank you for showing us all what real strength looks like. With respect and admiration, Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams *. Elena finished reading with tears streaming down her face. She looked up to find Jake watching her with an expression of nervous hope. He didn't have to write that, Jake said quietly. But when I told him I was planning to propose to you, he said you deserved to know the full story of what your choice had set in motion. Elena's breath caught. Propose. Jake slid off his chair and onto one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his other pocket. Elena's hands flew to her mouth as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful solitaire diamond. Elena Rodriguez, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. 6 months ago, you saved my life. But more than that, you saved my soul. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and you loved me into becoming the man I was meant to be. Elena was crying openly now, her heart hammering against her ribs. I know I don't deserve you, Jake continued. I know my past will always be part of our story. But Elena, I promise you this. I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the grace you showed me. I will love you with everything I have, support your dreams, honor your family, and work alongside you to make the world a little more compassionate. Jake's own eyes were bright with tears. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that love really can conquer hate? Elena dropped to her knees in front of him, framing his face with her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like tears and joy and the promise of forever. Around them, the San Diego evening settled into twilight, painting the sky in shades of hope. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against Jake's. I love you, she whispered. I love the man you were brave enough to become. I love you too, Jake replied. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for choosing love. As they held each other on that small balcony, both of them understood that their love story wasn't just about two people finding each other. It was about the ripple effects of grace, the power of second chances, and the truth that love, real, transformative love, could indeed conquer even the deepest hatred. Elena thought of her grandmother's words. When someone is drowning, you don't ask if they deserve to be saved. You throw them the rope. She had thrown Jake the rope that night at Camp Pendleton. But in the months that followed, they had built something stronger together. A bridge between two worlds, a testament to the possibility of redemption, and a love story that would inspire everyone who witnessed it. And so, a poor nurse who lost her job for saving a racist Navy SEAL discovered that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the most unlikely acts of grace. Elena and Jake's journey proves that when we choose love over fear, compassion over judgment, we don't just change our own lives, we change the world. What act of unexpected kindness has changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, because every act of love has the power to create ripples that reach farther than we can imagine. 3 years later, Elena and Jake Morrison would establish the Grace Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing healthcare and support services to underserved communities. Their wedding photo, Elena in her grandmother's lace dress, Jake in his dress blues, surrounded by a rainbow of faces from both their worlds, would hang in the foundation's lobby, a reminder that love really can conquer all. And every year on the anniversary of that night at Camp Pendleton, they would return to Luna's Cafe, order 2 cups of terrible coffee, and remember the moment when a poor nurse's act of grace changed 2 lives forever. Elena Rodriguez and Jake Morrison's love story reminds us that the most powerful force in the universe isn't hatred or fear. It's the choice to love someone into becoming their best self. Sometimes the people who need our grace the most are the ones who seem to deserve it the least. But when we choose compassion over judgment, we don't just save them, we save ourselves. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If this touched your heart, then you're going to love the next one. It's just as powerful and even more intriguing than you can imagine. So don't stop here. Click the video showing on your screen right now and continue the journey. I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that story. See you there.